Elvis Aaron Presley, January 8, 1935 – August 16, 1977, also known mononymously as Elvis, was an American singer and actor. Regarded as one of the most significant cultural icons of the 20th century, he is often referred to as the King of Rock and Roll or simply the King. Presley was born in Tupelo, Mississippi, and relocated to Memphis, Tennessee, with his family when he was 13 years old. His music career began there in 1954, recording at Sun Records with producer Sam Phillips, who wanted to bring the sound of African American music to a wider audience. Presley, on rhythm acoustic guitar, and accompanied by lead guitarist Scotty Moore and bassist Bill Black, was a pioneer of rockabilly, an up-tempo, backbeat-driven fusion of country music and rhythm and blues. In 1955, drummer DJ Fontana joined to complete the lineup of Presley's classic quartet, and RCA Victor acquired his contract in a deal arranged by Colonel Tom Parker, who would manage him for more than 2 decades. Presley's first RCA single, Heartbreak Hotel, was released in January 1956 and became a #1 hit in the United States. With a series of successful network television appearances and chart-topping records, he became the leading figure of the newly popular sound of rock and roll. His energized interpretations of songs and sexually provocative performance style, combined with a singularly potent mix of influences across color lines during a transformative era in race relations, made him enormously popular and controversial. In November 1956, Presley made his film debut in Love Me Tender. Drafted into military service in 1958, Presley relaunched his recording career 2 years later with some of his most commercially successful work. He held few concerts, however, and guided by Parker, proceeded to devote much of the 1960s to making Hollywood films and soundtrack albums, most of them critically derided. In 1968, following a 7-year break from live performances, he returned to the stage in the acclaimed television comeback special Elvis, which led to an extended Las Vegas concert residency and a string of highly profitable tours. In 1973, Presley gave the first concert by a solo artist to be broadcast around the world, Aloha from Hawaii. Years of prescription drug abuse severely compromised his health, and he died suddenly in 1977 at his Graceland estate at the age of 42. Presley is the best-selling solo artist in the history of recorded music. He was commercially successful in many genres, including pop, country, blues, and gospel. He won 3 competitive Grammys, received the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award at age 36, and has been inducted into multiple music halls of fame. Life and career. 1935–1953, early years. Childhood in Tupelo. Elvis Aaron Presley was born on January 8, 1935, in Tupelo, Mississippi, to Gladys Love Presley, née Smith, April 25, 1912 – August 14, 1958, in the 2-room shotgun house built by his father, Vernon Elvis Presley, April 10, 1916 – June 26, 1979, in preparation for the birth. Jesse Garron Presley, his identical twin brother, was delivered 35 minutes before him, stillborn. Presley became close to both parents and formed an especially close bond with his mother. The family attended an Assembly of God church, where he found his initial musical inspiration. On his mother's side, Presley's ancestry was Jewish and Scots-Irish, with some French Norman. Gladys and the rest of the family apparently believed that her great-great-grandmother, Mourning Dove White, was Cherokee Indian. This was confirmed by Elvis' granddaughter Riley Keough in 2017. The biography by Elaine Dundee supports the belief, although one genealogy researcher has contested it on multiple grounds. Vernon's forebears were of German or Scottish origin. Gladys was regarded by relatives and friends as the dominant member of the small family. Vernon moved from one odd job to the next, evincing little ambition. The family often relied on help from neighbors and government food assistance. In 1938, they lost their home after Vernon was found guilty of altering a check written by his landowner and sometime employer. He was jailed for 8 months, while Gladys and Elvis moved in with relatives. In September 1941, Presley entered first grade at East Tupelo Consolidated, where his teachers regarded him as average. He was encouraged to enter a singing contest after impressing his school teacher with a rendition of Red Foley's country song Old Shep during morning prayers. The contest, held at the Mississippi-Alabama Fair and Dairy Show on October 3, 1945, was his first public performance. The 10-year-old Presley was dressed as a cowboy. He stood on a chair to reach the microphone and sang Old Shep. He recalled placing fifth. A few months later, Presley received his first guitar for his birthday. He had hoped for something else by different accounts, either a bicycle or a rifle. Over the following year, he received basic guitar lessons from two of his uncles and the new pastor at the family's church. Presley recalled, "I took the guitar, and I watched people, and I learned to play a little bit. But I would never sing in public. I was very shy about it." In September 1946, Presley entered a new school, Milam, for sixth grade. He was regarded as a loner. The following year, he began bringing his guitar to school on a daily basis. He played and sang during lunchtime, and was often teased as a trashy kid who played hillbilly music. By then, the family was living in a largely black neighborhood. Presley was a devotee of Mississippi Slim's show on the Tupelo radio station WELO. He was described as crazy about music by Slim's younger brother, who was one of Presley's classmates and often took him into the station. Slim supplemented Presley's guitar tuition by demonstrating chord techniques. When his protege was 12 years old, Slim scheduled him for 2 on-air performances. Presley was overcome by stage fright the first time, but succeeded in performing the following week. Teenage life in Memphis. In November 1948, the family moved to Memphis, Tennessee. After residing for nearly a year in rooming houses, they were granted a 2-bedroom apartment in a public housing complex known as the Lauderdale Courts. Enrolled at L.C. Dooms High School, Presley received only a C in music in 8th grade. When his music teacher told him that he had no aptitude for singing, he brought in his guitar the next day and sang a recent hit, "Keep Them Cold Icy Fingers Off Me," in an effort to prove otherwise. A classmate later recalled that the teacher agreed that Elvis was right when he said that she didn't appreciate his kind of singing. He was usually too shy to perform openly, and was occasionally bullied by classmates who viewed him as a mama's boy. In 1950, he began practicing guitar regularly under the tutelage of Leedinson, a neighbor 2.5 years his senior. They and 3 other boys, including 2 future rockabilly pioneers, brothers Dorsey and Johnny Burnett, formed a loose musical collective that played frequently around the courts. That September, he began working as an usher at La Uz State Theater. Other jobs followed: Precision Tool, La Uz Again, and Marl Metal Products. During his junior year, Presley began to stand out more among his classmates, largely because of his appearance. He grew his sideburns and styled his hair with rose oil and Vaseline. In his free time, he would head down to Beale Street, the heart of Memphis' thriving blues scene, and gaze longingly at the wild, flashy clothes in the windows of Lansky Brothers. By his senior year, he was wearing those clothes. Overcoming his reticence about performing outside the Lauderdale Courts, he competed in Hume's annual minstrel show in April 1953. Singing and playing guitar, he opened with "Till I Waltz Again with You," a recent hit for Teresa Brewer. Presley recalled that the performance did much for his reputation. "I wasn't popular in school, I failed music, only thing I ever failed. And then they entered me in this talent show. When I came on stage I heard people kind of rumbling and whispering and so forth, 'cause nobody knew I even sang. It was amazing how popular I became after that." Presley, who received no formal music training and could not read music, studied and played by ear. He also frequented record stores that provided jukeboxes and listening booths to customers. He knew all of Hank Snow's songs, and he loved records by other country singers such as Roy Acuff, Ernest Tubb, Ted Daffan, Jimmy Rogers, Jimmy Davis, and Bob Wills. The Southern gospel singer Jake Hess, one of his favorite performers, was a significant influence on his ballad singing style. He was a regular audience member at the monthly all-night singings downtown, where many of the white gospel groups that performed reflected the influence of African American spiritual music. He adored the music of black gospel singer Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Like some of his peers, He may have attended blues venues of necessity, in the segregated South, only on nights designated for exclusively white audiences. He certainly listened to the regional radio stations, such as Dia AM, that played race records, spirituals, blues, and the modern, backbeat-heavy sound of rhythm and blues. Many of his future recordings were inspired by local African American musicians such as Arthur Crudup and Rufus Thomas. B.B. King recalled that he had known Presley before he was popular, when they both used to frequent Beale Street. By the time he graduated from high school in June 1953, Presley had already singled out music as his future. 1953-1955, first recordings. Sam Phillips and Son Records. In August 1953, Presley checked into the offices of Sun Records. He aimed to pay for a few minutes of studio time to record a two-sided acetate disc, My Happiness and That's When Your Heartaches Begin. He later claimed that he intended the record as a gift for his mother, or that he was merely interested in what he sounded like, although there was a much cheaper, amateur record-making service at a nearby general store. Biographer Peter Guralnick argued that he chose Sun in the hope of being discovered. Asked by receptionist Marian Ksker what kind of singer he was, Presley responded, "I sing all kinds." When she pressed him on who he sounded like, he repeatedly answered, "I don't sound like nobody." After he recorded, Sun boss Sam Phillips asked Ksker to note down the young man's name, which she did along with her own commentary, "Good ballad singer. Hold." In January 1954, Presley cut a second acetate at Sun Records, "I'll Never Stand in Your Way and It Wouldn't Be the Same Without You," but again nothing came of it. Not long after, he failed an audition for a local vocal quartet, the Songfellows. He explained to his father, "They told me I couldn't sing." Songfellow Jim Hamill later claimed that he was turned down because he did not demonstrate an ear for harmony at the time. In April, Presley began working for the Crown Electric Company as a truck driver. His friend Ronnie Smith, after playing a few local gigs with him, suggested he contact Eddie Bond, leader of Smith's professional band, which had an opening for a vocalist. Bond rejected him after a tryout, advising Presley to stick to truck driving because "you're never going to make it as a singer." Phillips, meanwhile, was always on the lookout for someone who could bring to a broader audience the sound of the black musicians on whom Sun focused. As Ksker reported, over and over, "I remember Sam saying, if I could find a white man who had the Negro sound and the Negro feel, I could make $1 billion." In June, he acquired a demo recording by Jimmy Sweeney of a ballad, "Without You," that he thought might suit the teenage singer. Presley came by the studio, but was unable to do it justice. Despite this, Phillips asked Presley to sing as many numbers as he knew. He was sufficiently affected by what he heard to invite two local musicians, guitarist Winfield Scotty Moore and upright bass player Bill Black, to work something up with Presley for a recording session. The session, held the evening of July 5, proved entirely unfruitful until late in the night. As they were about to abort and go home, Presley took his guitar and launched into a 1946 blues number, Arthur Crudup's "That's All Right." Moore recalled, "All of a sudden, Elvis just started singing this song, jumping around and acting the fool, and then Bill picked up his bass, and he started acting the fool, too, and I started playing with them. Sam, I think, had the door to the control booth open. He stuck his head out and said, 'What are you doing?' And we said, 'We don't know.' 'Well, back up,' he said, 'try to find a place to start, and do it again.'" Phillips quickly began taping. This was the sound he had been looking for. 3 days later, popular Memphis DJ Dewey Phillips played "That's All Right" on his Red, Hot, and Blue show. Listeners began phoning in, eager to find out who the singer really was. The interest was such that Phillips played the record repeatedly during the remaining 2 hours of his show. Interviewing Presley on air, Phillips asked him what high school he attended in order to clarify his color for the many callers who had assumed that he was black. During the next few days, the trio recorded a bluegrass number, Bill Monroe's "Blue Moon of Kentucky," again in a distinctive style and employing a jury-rigged echo effect that Sam Phillips dubbed slapback. A single was pressed with That's All Right on the A side and Blue Moon of Kentucky on the reverse. Early live performances and RCA Victor contract. The trio played publicly for the first time on July 17 at the Bon Air Club, Presley still sporting his child-size guitar. At the end of the month, they appeared at the Overton Park Shell, with Slim Women headlining. A combination of his strong response to rhythm and nervousness at playing before a large crowd led Presley to shake his legs as he performed. His wide-cut pants emphasized his movements, causing young women in the audience to start screaming. Moore recalled, during the instrumental parts, he would back off from the mic and be playing and shaking, and the crowd would just go wild. Black, a natural showman, whooped and rode his bass, hitting double licks that Presley would later remember as really a wild sound, like a jungle drum or something. Soon after, Moore and Black left their old band, the Starlight Wranglers, to play with Presley regularly, and DJ, promoter Bob Neal became the trio's manager. From August through October, they played frequently at the Eagle's Nest Club and returned to Sun Studio for more recording sessions, and Presley quickly grew more confident on stage. According to Moore, his movement was a natural thing, but he was also very conscious of what got a reaction. He'd do something one time and then he would expand on it real quick. Presley made what would be his only appearance on Nashville's Grand Ole Opry stage on October 2. After a polite audience response, Opry manager Jim Denny told Phillips that his singer was not bad but did not suit the program. Louisiana Hayride, radio commercial, and first television performances. In November 1954, Presley performed on Louisiana Hayride, the Opry's chief, and more adventurous, rival. The Shreveport-based show was broadcast to 198 radio stations in 28 states. Presley had another attack of nerves during the first set, which drew a muted reaction. A more composed and energetic second set inspired an enthusiastic response. House drummer DJ Fontana brought a new element, complementing Presley's movements with accented beats that he had mastered playing in strip clubs. Soon after the show, the Hayride engaged Presley for a year's worth of Saturday night appearances. Trading in his old guitar for $8, and seeing it promptly dispatched to the garbage, he purchased a Martin instrument for $175, and his trio began playing in new locales, including Houston, Texas, and Texarkana, Arkansas. Many fledgling performers, like Minnie Pearl, Johnny Horton, and Johnny Cash, sang the praises of Louisiana Hayride sponsor, the Southern-made Donut Flour Company, Texas, including Elvis Presley, who famously developed a lifelong love of donuts. Presley made his singular product endorsement commercial for the donut company, which was never released, recording a radio jingle, in exchange for a box of hot glazed donuts. Elvis made his first television appearance on the KSLA TV television broadcast of Louisiana Hayride. Soon after, he filled an audition for Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts on the CBS television network. By early 1955, Presley's regular Hayride appearances, constant touring, and well-received record releases had made him a regional star, from Tennessee to West Texas. In January, Neal signed a formal management contract with Presley and brought him to the attention of Colonel Tom Parker, whom he considered the best promoter in the music business. Parker, who claimed to be from West Virginia, he was actually Dutch, had acquired an honorary colonel's commission from country singer-turned-Louisiana Governor Jimmy Davis. Having successfully managed top country star Eddie Arnold, Parker was working with the new #1 country singer, Hank Snow. Parker booked Presley on Snow's February tour. When the tour reached Odessa, Texas, a 19-year-old Joya Robison saw Presley for the first time. His energy was incredible, his instinct was just amazing, I just didn't know what to make of it. There was just no reference point in the culture to compare it. By August, Sun had released 10 sides credited to Elvis Presley, Scotty and Bill. On the latest recordings, the trio were joined by a drummer. Some of the songs, like That's All Right, were in what one Memphis journalist described as the R&B idiom of Negro field jazz. Others, like Blue Moon of Kentucky, were more in the country field, but there was a curious blending of the two different musics in both. This blend of styles made it difficult for Presley's music to find radio airplay. According to Neil, many country music disc jockeys would not play it because he sounded too much like a black artist, and none of the rhythm and blues stations would touch him because he sounded too much like a hillbilly. The blend came to be known as rockabilly. At the time, Presley was variously billed as the king of Western bop, the hillbilly cat, and the Memphis Flash. Presley renewed Neil's management contract in August 1955, simultaneously appointing Parker as his special advisor. The group maintained an extensive touring schedule throughout the second half of the year. Neil recalled, "It was almost frightening, the reaction that came to Elvis from the teenage boys. So many of them, through some sort of jealousy, would practically hate him. There were occasions in some towns in Texas when we'd have to be sure to have a police guard because somebody'd always try to take a crack at him. They'd get a gang and try to waylay him or something." The trio became a quartet when Hayride drummer Fontana joined as a full member. In mid-October, they played a few shows in support of Bill Haley, whose Rock Around the Clock track had been a #1 hit the previous year. Haley observed that Presley had a natural feel for rhythm, and advised him to sing fewer ballads. At the Country Disc Jockey Convention in early November, Presley was voted the year's most promising male artist. Several record companies had by now shown interest in signing him. After 3 major labels made offers of up to $25,000, Parker and Phillips struck a deal with RCA Victor on November 21 to acquire Presley's Sun contract for an unprecedented $40,000. Presley, at 20, was still a minor, so his father signed the contract. Parker arranged with the owners of Hill and Range Publishing, Gene, and Julian Aberbach, to create 2 entities, Elvis Presley Music and Gladys Music, to handle all the new material recorded by Presley. Songwriters were obliged to forego 1/3 of their customary royalties in exchange for having him perform their compositions. By December, RCA had begun to heavily promote its new singer, and before month's end had reissued many of his Sun recordings. 1956–1958, Commercial Breakout and Controversy. First national TV appearances and debut album. On January 10, 1956, Presley made his first recordings for RCA in Nashville, extending Presley's by now customary backup of Moore, Black, Fontana, and Hayride pianist Floyd Kramer, who had been performing at live club dates with Presley. Kane listed guitarist Chet Atkins and 3 background singers, including Gordon Stoker of the popular Jordanaires Quartet, to fill out the sound. The session produced the moody, unusual Heartbreak Hotel, released as a single on January 27. Parker finally brought Presley to national television, booking him on CBS's stage show for 6 appearances over 2 months. The program, produced in New York, was hosted on alternate weeks by big band leaders and brothers Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey. After his first appearance, on January 28, Presley stayed in town to record at RCA's New York studio. The sessions yielded 8 songs, including a cover of Carl Perkins' rockabilly anthem Blue Suede Shoes. In February, Presley's I Forgot to Remember to Forget, a Sun recording initially released the previous August, reached the top of the Billboard country chart. Neil's contract was terminated, and, on March 2, Parker became Presley's manager. RCA released Presley's self-titled debut album on March 23. Joined by 5 previously unreleased Sun recordings, its 7 recently recorded tracks were of a broad variety. There were 2 country songs and a bouncy pop tune. The others would centrally define the evolving sound of rock and roll. Blue Suede Shoes an improvement over Perkins in almost every way, according to critic Robert Hilburn, and 3 R&B numbers that had been part of Presley's stage repertoire for some time, covers of Little Richard, Ray Charles, and the Drifters. As described by Hilburn, these were the most revealing of all. Unlike many white artists, who watered down the gritty edges of the original R&B versions of songs in the 50s, Presley reshaped them. He not only injected the tunes with his own vocal character but also made guitar, not piano, the lead instrument in all 3 cases. It became the first rock and roll album to top the Billboard chart, a position it held for 10 weeks. While Presley was not an innovative guitarist like Moore or contemporary African American rockers Bo Diddley and Chuck Berry, Cultural historian Gilbert B. Rodman argued that the album's cover image, of Elvis having the time of his life on stage with a guitar in his hands, played a crucial role in positioning the guitar as the instrument that best captured the style and spirit of this new music. Milton Berle Show and Hound Dog. On April 3, Presley made the first of two appearances on NBC's Milton Berle Show. His performance, on the deck of the USS Hancock in San Diego, California, prompted cheers and screams from an audience of sailors and their dates. A few days later, a flight taking Presley and his band to Nashville for a recording session left all three badly shaken when an engine died and the plane almost went down over Arkansas. 12 weeks after its original release, Heartbreak Hotel became Presley's first #1 pop hit. In late April, Presley began a 2-week residency at the New Frontier Hotel and Casino on the Las Vegas Strip. The shows were poorly received by the conservative, middle-aged hotel guests, like a jug of corn liquor at a champagne party, wrote a critic for Newsweek. Amid his Vegas tenure, Presley, who had serious acting ambitions, signed a 7-year contract with Paramount Pictures. He began a tour of the Midwest in mid-May, taking in 15 cities in as many days. He had attended several shows by Freddie Bell and the Bell Boys in Vegas and was struck by their cover of Hound Dog, a hit in 1953 for blues singer Big Mama Thornton by songwriters Jerry Lever and Mike Stoller. It became the new closing number of his act. After a show in La Crosse, Wisconsin, an urgent message on the letterhead of the local Catholic diocese's newspaper was sent to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. It warned that Presley is a definite danger to the security of the United States. His actions and motions were such as to rouse the sexual passions of teenage youth. After the show, more than 1,000 teenagers tried to gang into Presley's room at the auditorium. Indications of the harm Presley did just in La Crosse were the two high school girls, whose abdomen and thigh had Presley's autograph. The second Milton Berle Show appearance came on June 5 at NBC's Hollywood studio, amid another hectic tour. Berle persuaded Presley to leave his guitar backstage, advising, "Let him see you, son." During the performance, Presley abruptly halted an up-tempo rendition of Hound Dog with a wave of his arm and launched into a slow, grinding version accentuated with energetic, exaggerated body movements. Presley's gyrations created a storm of controversy. Television critics were outraged. Jack Gould of the New York Times wrote, "Mr. Presley has no discernible singing ability. His phrasing, if it can be called that, consists of the stereotyped variations that go with a beginner's aria in a bathtub. His one specialty is an accented movement of the body, primarily identified with the repertoire of the blonde bombshells of the burlesque runway." Ben Gross of the New York Daily News opined that popular music has reached its lowest depths in the grunt and groin antics of one Elvis Presley. Elvis, who rotates his pelvis, gave an exhibition that was suggestive and vulgar, tinged with the kind of animalism that should be confined to dives and bordellos. Ed Sullivan, whose own variety show was the nation's most popular, declared him unfit for family viewing. To Presley's displeasure, he soon found himself being referred to as Elvis the Pelvis, which he called one of the most childish expressions I ever heard, coming from an adult. Steve Allen Show and first Sullivan appearance. The Berle shows drew such high ratings that Presley was booked for a July 1 appearance on NBC's Steve Allen Show in New York. Allen, no fan of rock and roll, introduced a new Elvis in a white bow tie and black tails. Presley sang Hound Dog for less than a minute to a basset hound wearing a top hat and bow tie. As described by television historian Jay Costin, Allen thought Presley was talentless and absurd. He set things up so that Presley would show his contrition. Allen later wrote that he found Presley's strange, gangly, country boy charisma, his hard-to-define cuteness, and his charming eccentricity intriguing and simply worked him into the customary comedy fabric of his program. Just before the final rehearsal for the show, Presley told a reporter, "I'm holding down on this show. I don't want to do anything to make people dislike me. I think TV is important, so I'm going to go along, but I won't be able to give the kind of show I do in a personal appearance." Presley would refer back to the Allen Show as the most ridiculous performance of his career. Later that night, he appeared on Henry Gardner Calling, a popular local TV show. Pressed on whether he had learned anything from the criticism to which he was being subjected, Presley responded, "No, I haven't. I don't feel like I'm doing anything wrong. I don't see how any type of music would have any bad influence on people when it's only music. I mean, how would rock and roll music make anyone rebel against their parents?" The next day, Presley recorded Hound Dog, along with Any Way You Want Me and Don't Be Cruel. The Jordanaires sang harmony, as they had on the Steve Allen Show. They would work with Presley through the 1960s. A few days later, Presley made an outdoor concert appearance in Memphis, at which he announced, "You know, those people in New York are not gonna change me none. I'm gonna show you what the real Elvis is like tonight." In August, a judge in Jacksonville, Florida, ordered Presley to tame his act. Throughout the following performance, he largely kept still, except for wiggling his little finger suggestively in mockery of the order. The single pairing Don't Be Cruel with Hound Dog ruled the top of the charts for an 11-week stay mark that would not be surpassed for 36 years. Recording sessions for Presley's second album took place in Hollywood during the first week of September. Lieber and Stoller, the writers of Hound Dog, contributed Love Me. Allen's show with Presley had, for the first time, beaten CBS's Ed Sullivan Show in the ratings. Sullivan, despite his June pronouncement, booked Presley for 3 appearances for an unprecedented $50,000. The first, on September 9, 1956, was seen by approximately 60 million viewers, a record 82.6% of the television audience. Actor Charles Laughton hosted the show, filling in while Sullivan was recovering from a car accident. Presley appeared in 2 segments that night from CBS Television City in Los Angeles. According to Elvis legend, Presley was shot only from the waist up. Watching clips of the Allen and Burl shows with his producer, Sullivan had opined that Presley got some kind of device hanging down below the crotch of his pants so when he moves his legs back and forth you can see the outline of his cock. "I think it's a Coke bottle. We just can't have this on a Sunday night. This is a family show." Sullivan publicly told TV Guide, "As for his gyrations, the whole thing can be controlled with camera shots." In fact, Presley was shown head to toe in the first and second shows. Though the camera work was relatively discreet during his debut, with leg concealing close-ups when he danced, the studio audience reacted in customary style, screaming. Presley's performance of his forthcoming single, the ballad Love Me Tender, prompted a record-shattering million advance orders. More than any other single event, it was this first appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show that made Presley a national celebrity of barely precedented proportions. Accompanying Presley's rise to fame, a cultural shift was taking place that he both helped inspire and came to symbolize. Igniting the biggest pop craze since Glenn Miller and Frank Sinatra, Presley brought rock and roll into the mainstream of popular culture, writes historian Marty Jesser. As Presley set the artistic pace, other artists followed. Presley, more than anyone else, gave the young a belief in themselves as a distinct and somehow unified generation, the first in America ever to feel the power of an integrated youth culture. Crazed crowds and film debut. The audience response at Presley's live shows became increasingly fevered. Moore recalled, "He'd start out, 'You ain't nothing but a hound dog,' and they'd just go to pieces. They'd always react the same way. There'd be a riot every time." At the 2 concerts he performed in September at the Mississippi-Alabama Fair and Dairy Show, 50 National Guardsmen were added to the police security to ensure that the crowd would not cause a ruckus. Elvis, Presley's second album, was released in October and quickly rose to number 1 on the Billboard. The album includes Old Shep, which he sang at the talent show in 1945, and which now marked the first time he played piano on an RCA session. According to Gorelnik, one can hear in the halting chords and the somewhat stumbling rhythm both the unmistakable emotion and the equally unmistakable valuing of emotion over technique. Assessing the musical and cultural impact of Presley's recordings from That's All Right through Elvis, rock critic Dave Marsh wrote that these records, more than any others, contain the seeds of what rock and roll was, has been and most likely what it may foreseeably become. Presley returned to The Sullivan Show at its main studio in New York, hosted this time by its namesake, on October 28. After the performance, Crowds in Nashville and St. Louis burned him in effigy. His first motion picture, Love Me Tender, was released on November 21. Though he was not top billed, the film's original title The Reno Brothers was changed to capitalize on his latest #1 record. Love Me Tender had hit the top of the charts earlier that month. To further take advantage of Presley's popularity, 4 musical numbers were added to what was originally a straight acting role. The film was panned by the critics but did very well at the box office. Presley would receive top billing on every subsequent film he made. On December 4, Presley dropped into Sun Records where Carl Perkins and Jerry Lee Lewis were recording and had an impromptu jam session, along with Johnny Cash. Though Phillips no longer had the right to release any Presley material, he made sure that the session was captured on tape. The results, none officially released for 25 years, became known as the $1 Million Quartet recordings. The year ended with a front-page story in the Wall Street Journal reporting that Presley merchandise had brought in $22 million on top of his record sales, and Billboard's declaration that he had placed more songs in the top 100 than any other artist since records were first charted. In his first full year at RCA, one of the music industry's largest companies, Presley had accounted for over 50% of the label's singles sales. Lieber and Stoller collaboration and draft notice. Presley made his third and final Ed Sullivan Show appearance on January 6, 1957. On this occasion indeed shot only down to the waist. Some commentators have claimed that Parker orchestrated an appearance of censorship to generate publicity. In any event, as critic Grell Marcus describes, Presley did not tie himself down. Leaving behind the bland clothes he had worn on the first 2 shows, he stepped out in the outlandish costume of a pasha, if not a harem girl. From the makeup over his eyes, the hair falling in his face, the overwhelmingly sexual cast of his mouth, he was playing Rudolph Valentino in The Chic, with all stops out. To close, displaying his range and defying Sullivan's wishes, Presley sang a gentle black spiritual, Peace in the Valley. At the end of the show, Sullivan declared Presley a real decent, fine boy. 2 days later, the Memphis Draft Board announced that Presley would be classified 1A and would probably be drafted sometime that year. Each of the 3 Presley singles released in the first half of 1957 went to #1, Too Much, All Shook Up, and Let Me Be Your Teddy Bear. Already an international star, he was attracting fans even where his music was not officially released. Under the headline Presley Records a Craze in Soviet, the New York Times reported that pressings of his music on discarded X-ray plates were commanding high prices in Leningrad. Between film shoots and recording sessions, Presley also found time to purchase an 18-room mansion 8 miles, 13 kilometers, south of downtown Memphis for himself and his parents, Graceland. Loving You, the soundtrack to his second film, released in July, was Presley's third straight #1 album. The title track was written by Lieber and Stoller, who were then retained to write 4 of the 6 songs recorded at the sessions for Jailhouse Rock, Presley's next film. The songwriting team effectively produced the Jailhouse sessions and developed a close working relationship with Presley, who came to regard them as his good luck charm. He was fast, said Lieber. Any demo you gave him he knew by heart in 10 minutes. The title track was yet another #1 hit, as was the Jailhouse Rock EP. Presley undertook 3 brief tours during the year, continuing to generate a crazed audience response. A Detroit newspaper suggested that the trouble with going to see Elvis Presley is that you're liable to get killed. Villanova students belted him with eggs in Philadelphia, and in Vancouver the crowd rioted after the end of the show, destroying the stage. Frank Sinatra, who had famously inspired the swooning of teenage girls in the 1940s, condemned the new musical phenomenon. In a magazine article, he decried rock and roll as brutal, ugly, degenerate, vicious. It fosters almost totally negative and destructive reactions in young people. It smells phony and false. It is sung, played and written, for the most part, by cretinous goons. This rancid-smelling aphrodisiac I deplore. Asked for a response, Presley said, I admire the man. He has a right to say what he wants to say. He is a great success and a fine actor, but I think he shouldn't have said it. This is a trend, just the same as he faced when he started years ago. Lieber and Stoller were again in the studio for the recording of Elvis' Christmas album. Toward the end of the session, they wrote the song on the spot at Presley's request, Santa Claus is Back in Town, an innuendo-laden blues. The holiday release stretched Presley's string of #1 albums to 4 and would become the best-selling Christmas album ever in the United States, with eventual sales of over 20 million worldwide. After the session, Moore and Black, drawing only modest weekly salaries, sharing in none of Presley's massive financial success, resigned. Though they were brought back on a per diem basis a few weeks later, it was clear that they had not been part of Presley's inner circle for some time. On December 20th, Presley received his draft notice. He was granted a deferment to finish the forthcoming King Creole, in which $350,000 had already been invested by Paramount and producer Hal Wallace. A couple of weeks into the new year, Don't, another Lieber and Stoller tune, became Presley's 10th #1 seller. It had been only 21 months since Heartbreak Hotel had brought him to the top for the first time. Recording sessions for the King Creole soundtrack were held in Hollywood in mid-January 1958. Lieber and Stoller provided 3 songs and were again on hand, but it would be the last time they and Presley worked closely together. As Stoller recalled, Presley's manager and entourage sought to wall him off. He was removed, they kept him separate. A brief soundtrack session on February 11 marked another ending. It was the final occasion on which Black was to perform with Presley. He died in 1965. 1958–1960, military service and mother's death. On March 24, 1958, Presley was drafted into the U.S. Army as a private at Fort Chaffee, near Fort Smith, Arkansas. His arrival was a major media event. Hundreds of people descended on Presley as he stepped from the bus. Photographers then accompanied him into the fort. Presley announced that he was looking forward to his military stint, saying that he did not want to be treated any differently from anyone else. "The Army can do anything it wants with me." Presley commenced basic training at Fort Hood, Texas. During a 2-week leave in early June, he recorded 5 songs in Nashville. In early August, his mother was diagnosed with hepatitis, and her condition rapidly worsened. Presley, granted emergency leave to visit her, arrived in Memphis on August 12. 2 days later, she died of heart failure, aged 46. Presley was devastated. Their relationship had remained extremely close even into his adulthood. They would use baby talk with each other and Presley would address her with pen names. After training, Presley joined the 3rd Armored Division in Freiburg, Germany, on October 1. While on maneuvers, Presley was introduced to amphetamines by a sergeant. He became practically evangelical about their benefits, not only for energy but for strength and weight loss as well, and many of his friends in the outfit joined him in indulging. The Army also introduced Presley to karate, which he studied seriously, training with Jürgen Seidel. It became a lifelong interest, which he later included in his live performances. Fellow soldiers have attested to Presley's wish to be seen as an able, ordinary soldier, despite his fame, and to his generosity. He donated his Army pay to charity, purchased TV sets for the base, and bought an extra set of fatigues for everyone in his outfit. While in Freiburg, Presley met 14-year-old Priscilla Bewley. They would eventually marry after a 7.5-year courtship. In her autobiography, Priscilla said that Presley was concerned that his 24-month spell as a GI would ruin his career. In special services, he would have been able to give musical performances and remain in touch with the public, but Parker had convinced him that to gain popular respect, he should serve his country as a regular soldier. Media reports echoed Presley's concerns about his career, but RCA producer Steve Scholes and Freddie Beanstalk of Hill and Range had carefully prepared for his 2-year hiatus. Armed with a substantial amount of unreleased material, they kept up a regular stream of successful releases. Between his induction and discharge, Presley had 10 top 40 hits, including Wear My Ring Around Your Neck, the best-selling Hard-Headed Woman, and One Night in 1958, and, Now and Then There's a Fool Such as I, and the #1 A Big Hunk Love in 1959. RCA also generated 4 albums compiling old material during this period, Most successfully Elvis Golden Records, 1958, which hit number 3 on the LP chart. 1960–1967, Focus on Films. Elvis is Back. Presley returned to the United States on March 2, 1960, and was honorably discharged 3 days later with the rank of sergeant. The train that carried him from New Jersey to Tennessee was mobbed all the way, and Presley was called upon to appear at scheduled stops to please his fans. On the night of March 20, he entered RCA's Nashville studio to cut tracks for a new album along with a single, Stuck on You, which was rushed into release and swiftly became a #1 hit. Another Nashville session 2 weeks later yielded a pair of his best-selling singles, the ballads It's Now or Never and Are You Lonesome Tonight? Along with the rest of Elvis is Back. The album features several songs described by Greil Marcus as full of Chicago blues menace, driven by Presley's own super-mic'd acoustic guitar, brilliant playing by Scotty Moore, and mnemonic sax work from Boots Randolph. Elvis' singing wasn't sexy, it was pornographic. As a whole, the record conjured up the vision of a performer who could be all things, in the words of music historian John Robertson, a flirtatious teenage idol with a heart of gold, a tempestuous, dangerous lover, a gut-bucket blues singer, a sophisticated nightclub entertainer, a raucous rocker. Released only days after recording was complete, it reached number 2 on the album chart. Presley returned to television on May 12 as a guest on the Frank Sinatra Timex special, ironic for both stars, given Sinatra's not-so-distant excoriation of rock and roll. Also known as Welcome Home Elvis, the show had been taped in late March, the only time all year Presley performed in front of an audience. Parker secured an unheard-of $125,000 fee for 8 minutes of singing. The broadcast drew an enormous viewership. G.I. Blues, the soundtrack to Presley's first film since his return, was a #1 album in October. His first LP of sacred material, His Hand in Mine, followed 2 months later. It reached number 13 on the US pop chart and number 3 in the UK, remarkable figures for a gospel album. In February 1961, Presley performed 2 shows for a benefit event in Memphis, on behalf of 24 local charities. During a luncheon preceding the event, RCA presented him with a plaque certifying worldwide sales of over 75 million records. A 12-hour Nashville session in mid-March yielded nearly all of Presley's next studio album, Something for Everybody. As described by John Robertson, it exemplifies the Nashville sound, the restrained, cosmopolitan style that would define country music in the 1960s. Presaging much of what was to come from Presley himself over the next half-decade, the album is largely a pleasant, unthreatening pastiche of the music that had once been Elvis' birthright. It would be his 6th #1 LP. Another benefit concert, raising money for a Pearl Harbor memorial, was staged on March 25, in Hawaii. It was to be Presley's last public performance for 7 years. Lost in Hollywood. Parker had by now pushed Presley into a heavy filmmaking schedule, focused on formulaic, modestly budgeted musical comedies. Presley, at first, insisted on pursuing higher roles, but when 2 films in a more dramatic vein, Flaming Star, 1960, and Wild in the Country, 1961, were less commercially successful, he reverted to the formula. Among the 27 films he made during the 1960s, there were a few further exceptions. His films were almost universally panned, critic Andrew Kane dismissed them as a pantheon of bad taste. Nonetheless, they were virtually all profitable. Hal Wallace, who produced 9 of them, declared, "A Presley picture is the only sure thing in Hollywood." Of Presley's films in the 1960s, 15 were accompanied by soundtrack albums and another 5 by soundtrack EPs. The film's rapid production and release schedules, he frequently starred in 3 a year, affected his music. According to Jerry Lieber, the soundtrack formula was already evident before Presley left for the Army: 3 ballads, 1 medium-tempo, #1 up-tempo, and 1 break blues boogie. As the decade wore on, the quality of the soundtrack songs grew progressively worse. Julie Parrish, who appeared in Paradise, Hawaiian Style, 1966, says that he disliked many of the songs chosen for his films. The Overdeniers Gordon Stoker describes how Presley would retreat from the studio microphone. The material was so bad that he felt like he couldn't sing it. Most of the film albums featured a song or two from respected writers such as the team of Dak Pomus and Mort Schumann. But by and large, according to biographer Jerry Hopkins, the numbers seem to be written on order by men who never really understood Elvis or rock and roll. Regardless of the song's quality, it has been argued that Presley generally sang them well, with commitment. Critic Dave Marsh heard the opposite. Presley isn't trying, probably the wisest course in the face of material like No Room to Rumba in a Sports Car and Rock-a-Hula Baby. In the first half of the decade, 3 of Presley's soundtrack albums were ranked number 1 on the pop charts, and a few of his most popular songs came from his films, such as Can't Help Falling in Love, 1961, and Return to Cinder, 1962. Viva Las Vegas, the title track to the 1964 film, was a minor hit as a B-side, and became truly popular only later, but, as with artistic merit, the commercial returns steadily diminished. During the 5-year span 1964 through 1968, Presley had only one top 10 hit, Crying in the Chapel, 1965, a gospel number recorded back in 1960. As for non-film albums, between the June 1962 release of Potluck and the November 1968 release of the soundtrack to the television special that signaled his comeback, only one LP of new material by Presley was issued, the gospel album How Great Thou Art, 1967. It won him his first Grammy Award, for Best Sacred Performance. As Marsh described, Presley was arguably the greatest white gospel singer of his time, and, really the last rock and roll artist to make gospel as vital a component of his musical personality as his secular songs. Shortly before Christmas 1966, more than 7 years since they first met, Presley proposed to Priscilla Bewling. They were married on May 1, 1967, in a brief ceremony in their suite at the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. The flow of formulaic films and assembly line soundtracks rolled on. It was not until October 1967, when the Clambake soundtrack LP registered record low sales for a new Presley album, that RCA executives recognized a problem. By then, of course, the damage had been done, as historians Connie Kirkberg and Mark Hendricks put it. Elvis was viewed as a joke by serious music lovers and has been to all but his most loyal fans. 1968-1973, Comeback. Elvis, the '68 Comeback Special. Presley's only child, Lisa Marie, was born on February 1, 1968, during a period when he had grown deeply unhappy with his career. Of the 8 Presley singles released between January 1967 and May 1968, only 2 charted in the top 40, and none higher than number 28. His forthcoming soundtrack album, Speedway, would rank at number 82 on the Billboard chart. Parker had already shifted his plans to television, where Presley had not appeared since the Sinatra Timex show in 1960. He maneuvered a deal with NBC that committed the network to both finance a theatrical feature and broadcast a Christmas special. Recorded in late June in Burbank, California, the special, simply called Elvis, aired on December 3, 1968. Later known as the '68 Comeback Special, the show featured lavishly staged studio productions as well as songs performed with a band in front of a small audience, Presley's first live performances since 1961. The live segments saw Presley dressed in tight black leather, singing and playing guitar in an uninhibited style reminiscent of his early rock and roll days. Director and co-producer Steve Binder had worked hard to produce a show that was far from the hour of Christmas songs Parker had originally planned. The show, NBC,